Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so let's start with our seminar today. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Almudena Alonso Herrero, who is now at the Instituto de Física de Santander within this program, Programa de Excelencia. She did the PhD at the Universidad Complutense de Madrid and also at the Oxford University, and then she moved to Arizona as a postdoc and also to the University of Herefordshire. And finally, she moved to Madrid within the Ramón y Cajal project, and now Santander. So today, Almudena is going to talk about AGN activity in local luminous infrared galaxies. And Almudena.
Okay, thank you. So, yes, Christina said I'm just going to be talking about active galactic nuclei AGN activity in local luminous infrared galaxies. And you can see I'm putting here in large font Miguel Pereira's name. He was my student. He just recently defended his PhD in Madrid. So I'm going to be presenting work from two of our recent papers. So basically, the idea is to look for AGN activity that is not detected in the optical using infrared and X-ray observations of local luminous infrared galaxies. So these kind of galaxies that are very bright in the infrared were well known even before the IRAS satellite was launched in the 80s. In the early 1970s, Ricky and Lowe did a systematic survey at 10 microns of extragalactic sources, and they found that a lot of known sources were also bright in the infrared. Basically, what they did is they classified their population of infrared bright galaxies in three groups. AGN, in their sample, they had Seyfarths and QSOs were bright in the infrared. Here are quasars, and some of the Seyfarths are here. They also found a population of what they called ultra-high infrared luminosity galaxies, which is what today we call ultraluminous infrared galaxies. And here there are two examples, well-known galaxies, Markarian 231 and NGC 1614. And also another type of galaxies that were also quite bright in the infrared, but they were not classified as Seyfarths. And among them, they found that M82 and ARP299 were, as I said, very bright in the infrared, but no evidence of an AGN. And basically, the question was powering this bright emission in the infrared. 10 years later, more or less, with the launch of the IRAS satellite, and now much more recently with ISO, with Spitzer and Herschel, we are finding this population of luminous and ultraluminous infrared galaxies out to redshift of 2 and 3. Just for your information, LIRGs are defined, basically LIRGs and LIRGs are defined in terms of their infrared luminosity between 8 and 1,000 microns. And luminous infrared galaxy has an infrared luminosity between 10 to the 11 and 10 to the 12 solar luminosities. And ultraluminous infrared galaxies have infrared luminosities between 10 to the 12 and 10 to the 13 solar luminosities. So as I said before, with IRAS here, this is just, actually these are simulations, but they are quite close to the observations. What we found is that with IRAS, we were able to detect this kind of galaxies, luminous and infrared and ultraluminous infrared galaxies, in the local universe, not at very high redshift. So then with more sensitive satellites, we were able to detect this population of infrared bright galaxies out to redshift of 2 and 3. And this is just a recent result with Herschel using PAX and SPIRE observations. And you can see that these kind of galaxies, here you can see the infrared luminosities are detected in great numbers. So what are the general properties of these galaxies? As you said, they are defined basically by their infrared luminosity. So what it basically means is that their spectral energy distribution is dominated by the infrared emission. As you can see here, these are just a few examples from the early compilation by Sanders and Mirabel. And in the early days with the IRAS data, they were classified basically based on their 25 to 60 micron colors. So about 3/4 of the population were what called cold LIRGs and LIRGs, and they were mostly dominated by star formation. whereas about 25% of this population were called warm, because they have these 25 to 60 micron colors that are about 0.2, and they were believed to be powered by AGN. So basically, when you look at the spectral energy distribution, you see this bright peak that it moves in the warm LIRGs, moves towards shorter wavelengths here. Short wavelength goes the other way here. And basically, the main question back then was what was the dominant mechanism hitting the dust. Basically, this is dust emission. So the question is what's hitting the dust? Is star formation, is an AGN, or is both? And the other important property about this population of LIRGs and LIRGs is that in the local universe, they are rare. You can see here the luminosity function. Well, it's difficult to see. This line here is just the population of normal galaxies, and these are infrared bright galaxies. So as you can see, they don't dominate the luminosity functions for the low luminosities, but then when you go to luminosities above 10 to the 11 or 10 to the 12, they are, together with quasars, they are the dominant population. So what do we know about the morphologies of these bright of these LIRGs and LIRGs? When we go to the high luminosity end, LIRGs, we know that this population is dominated basically by interacting galaxies and major mergers, and this is something that has been known for years. And this is just some HST images of from this paper by Macarena Garcia Marin. So you can see that most LIRGs in the local universe are going through these very strong interactions. The situation for LIRGs, so at the sort of lower infrared luminosity end, is slightly different. In fact, the fraction of interacting galaxies is only between 25 and 40%. So it's something important to keep in mind. And what happens, especially at the low luminosity end, is that a significant fraction of this population are just these galaxies. They look more or less like normal spirals, or you can see that the galaxies are in groups, but they don't seem to be going through a very strong interaction. But of course, here, I mean, I don't know if you can see it, but you can see that some of these LIRGs are also mergers, and you can see tidal tails here. So a small fraction of this population are also mergers. And what is the importance of the population of LIRGs and LIRGs in the context of evolution of galaxies? In particular, in the cosmological context of understanding how galaxies are formed and evolved, in the last few years, it's been proposed that mergers play a very important role in the formation of galaxies, and in particular in the formation of today's elliptical galaxies. So this is just work by Hopkins and collaborators, where they basically explain the formation of dead ellipticals today through major mergers with gas-rich galaxies. And basically here they show the evolution of the quasar luminosity here, and the top panel is the star formation rate. And as you can see, there is an important phase during the strong interaction of gas-rich galaxies, not right at the beginning of their interaction, but when the interaction is coming close to an end, when the two galaxies are merging, that a lot of gas and dust has been transported into the center of the galaxies, and then you're actually making the black hole in the center grow. And because you accumulate so much gas and dust in the centers, you're going to go through an infrared bright phase where you're going to have probably a Compton thick and obscured AGN in the center, and also a lot of star formation, very, very intense star formation, dust obscured, so you would actually classify the galaxy as a LIRG. And then after a time, because of feedback from the AGN and the star formation, supernovae, etc., you will end up blowing out all the gas and dust in the center of the galaxies, and you will end up with an X-ray and finally an optically bright AGN. And eventually you'll run out of fuel, and then you'll stop the active galactic nuclei phase and the star formation, and you end up as an elliptical galaxy like the ones we see today in the universe. And this has been proved or shown observationally at intermediate and high redshifts. well, between 0.5 and 2% and 2, redshift 2.5 and 2. Here is the co-moving infrared density evolution. In red is the total. And then you can see the contribution of the population of LIRGs and ULIRGs. As we said before, in the local universe, they are rare. These two populations are very rare. But as you can see, at redshift of 2, they seem to be the major contributors to this infrared density, which can be translated into star formation rate, at least the obscure part of the star formation rate. So as you can see, at the intermediate redshift, these populations are very important and determine the evolution of galaxies. Another way to see the role of this population is to look at the fraction of very massive galaxies that are going through a LIRG or a ULIRG phase. And from this work, at redshift of 2, it appears that at least half of the massive galaxies are going through this infrared bright phase, as predicted by the simulations, the cosmological simulations. So what do we know about the powering mechanism in these galaxies in the local universe? As I said before, the infrared emission is basically dust emission. Is dust being heated either by star formation or AGN or both. So from more than 20 years ago, we know that the fraction of LIRGs and ULIRGs hosting an AGN increases with infrared luminosity. This is summarized here in recent work from a couple of years ago. Here, this is galaxies with infrared luminosities below 10 to the 11, LIRGs here and ULIRGs. And as you can see in orange and red, these are galaxies classified as Seyfarths. As you increase the infrared luminosity of the system, you increase the fraction of systems containing an AGN. Whereas conversely, the fraction of galaxies just being powered, this is just the nuclear emission being powered by H2 emissions, so star formation, decreases with the infrared luminosity. And the number of composite systems, so basically systems that have evidence of both AGN and star formation activity, more or less stays the same. It just stays more or less constant with the infrared luminosity. Another thing that we know about local LIRGs, and now from now on, I'm just going to be focusing on local luminous infrared galaxies. So the ones with this in this infrared luminosity range. Another thing that we know about local LIRGs is that they have very extended star formation. Perhaps in the past, because people thought that they were mostly interacting galaxies, people thought that the star formation was very compact in the nuclear regions. But as it turns out, recent works just using different tracers like H-alpha or Paschen alpha or mid-infrared tracers that basically give you the star formation rate are showing that, yeah, you do have systems that are quite compact. The star formation is in the central 500 parsecs to kiloparsecs, but the other half of the population shows very extended star formation. So basically the star formation is extended over several kiloparsecs. This is just shown here in just with a color image of a local LIRG. This is a composite image using HST data. And you can see here Paschen alpha, which is basically star formation, would be here in pink, is extended over a few kiloparsecs. Here would be the similar way of doing this, but using H-alpha observations. This is just very recent work by Santiago Arriba and collaborators. And here it actually shows a comparison of the H-alpha half-light radius in local galaxies, in green here, and a comparison with high redshift galaxies. And as you can see, yeah, about 50% of local galaxies have relatively compact emission, but there is also a significant fraction of local galaxies that have very extended star formation. Whereas interestingly, at high redshift, most infrared bright galaxies seem to have very, very extended star formation. So you could ask the question, well, as I said before, we more or less know what fraction of local LIRGs are hosting AGN, so why do we care about doing this using mid-infrared and X-ray observations? Well, one important thing to keep in mind is that the local LIRGs and ULIRGs have a lot of dust. And that's how they are defined, by their infrared emission. And if you construct color maps, basically are giving you an idea of the dust distribution, you can see that they have very complicated dust morphologies. These are just color maps done with the HSD using the NICMOS instrument of just a few local LIRGs and the central regions. And as you can see, they have very complicated morphologies. And actually, when you estimate the extinction using spectroscopic observations or even photometric colors, you get values of the extinctions that can go from the visual extinctions between 2 to up to 14 magnitudes. So obviously, you can penetrate the dust when the extinction is low, but when you are in the high extinction regime, you really need infrared observations and X-ray observations to try to figure out if there is an AGN. And also, the other important thing is that up until now, we didn't have an estimate of the AGN bolometric contribution to the infrared luminosity of these systems. Yes, we know from optical or infrared spectroscopy there is an AGN, but it is important to know if it dominates the bolometric luminosity or not. So basically, this is what we are trying to do with these two studies. So this is our sample of local LIRGs. Basically, we selected our sample from the IRIS revised bright galaxy sample. Basically, we imposed these two criteria here. Infrared luminosity is about 10 to the 11.05, and distances of less than 78 megaparsecs. So basically, this way we constructed a complete sample of local LIRGs that is volume limited. Our sample contains 45 IRAS systems and 53 individual nuclei. As we said before, some of these galaxies are in interacting systems, so there is more individual nuclei than systems. And here you can see the distribution in infrared luminosities. And here, as you can see, we plotted the infrared luminosities for all the individual galaxies. So some of the galaxies in some of the nuclei in the galaxies are below the definition of 10 to the 11, but that's because the system itself is above 10 to the 11. And this is just the activity classification based on optical spectroscopy, and is similar to larger samples. So basically, because this is a representative sample, so basically about 30% of our sample from optical spectroscopy contains an AGN. There's also a large fraction of composite objects. Our observations were taken with Spitzer using the IRS instrument, using our own guaranteed time data and also data from the GOES project and to more galaxies from other projects. And then for the X-ray part, we have Chandra and X-ray and XMM Newton data for 27 galaxies. So basically half the sample, but it's still representative of the whole sample. So now I'm going to start just describing the results using mid-infrared spectroscopy. And one thing that I want to point out is that because Spitzer is a small telescope, it is very sensitive because it was working in this phase. But the problem is because it's an 80-centimeter telescope, the angular resolution you can get is relatively limited. So basically, what we are getting is we are getting spectra basically with typical apertures of 13 by 13 arcseconds. So basically, we are probing the central, the central 4 kiloparsecs. And just here, I'm just showing you a few examples of galaxies in our samples, showing more or less the same field of view. And this is important to keep in mind because you're including a lot of emission in this aperture. That's why it's important to do some sort of spectral deconvolution to try to separate out star formation from the AGN. And we have galaxies that know, for instance, this one has a composite nucleus right in the center, but also has a very bright ring of star formation. Here's another case of a Seyfert-2 nucleus surrounded by H2 regions. Here, this is a galaxy that is mostly dominated by the AGN. So it's important to keep this in mind because our apertures are relatively large. So basically, the idea is just to use templates with the spectra. You use the templates of star formation and AGN and try to get the fraction of each of those two mechanisms at the different wavelengths. Here, just the templates we used for our work. This is a template for starburst galaxies, and these are templates for luminous infrared galaxies. And for the AGN part, we used clumpy torus models. And the only thing that I want you to notice here is that when the starburst templates are dominated by these broad features, the PAHs, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons features, that are basically telling us that there is star formation, whereas in the AGN, the pure AGN templates, these PAHs are not present. So just a little bit more about the torus templates. We are using the clumpy torus models from the Nenkova collaborators group. I'm not going to go into too many details about these models, but just to tell you that these models have been very successful at explaining the properties of local Cephers and quasars. And here Christina is an expert on this kind of models. So we know that they work very well for AGN, for local AGN, just explaining the infrared luminosity. The other important thing about these models, actually is a very nice thing, is that the output of the radiative transfer scales with the bolometric luminosity of the AGN, which is basically what we are after. So, and this was shown just last year in a paper we wrote with Christine and people here. We showed that when you compare the AGN bolometric luminosity that you get from the modeling using these clumpy torus models with the bolometric luminosity derived from using other methods, you get a relatively good agreement. So basically, this is telling us that we can use this kind of modeling to get the bolometric luminosity of the AGN. These are just a few examples of the AGN starburst spectral decomposition of the spectra. I'm basically going from galaxies that are completely dominated by the starburst components. I don't know if you can see the colors, but here black is the observed spectrum, purple is the starburst template, green is the torus model, and red is the sum of those two. So basically, we have galaxies that don't seem to have any evidence of an AGN. Basically, they are perfectly reproduced with starburst templates to galaxies like this one that are completely or mostly dominated by the AGN emission, and galaxies that are intermediate, as we knew from the morphologies. So this method seems to be working well and reproducing well the observed spectra. And this can be actually quantified, and basically we can get an idea of the AGN contribution at two different wavelengths, just reference wavelengths that are just continuum. They don't have any spectral features, so it's easy to quantify the AGN emission. So we did this at 24 microns and at 6 microns. And as you can see, on average, the AGN contribution is relatively small. Within the slits is at 24 microns, is basically 20% on average for the sample. And at 6 microns, slightly higher, is about 30% on average. One thing to keep in mind is because the size of the slit, we have to make aperture corrections because our slits are not covering the whole galaxy. But we also have the IRAC and the Spitzer images, so we can actually do that and correct for that. So basically, the numbers that we want to keep in mind here is that it's only a very, very small fraction of local LIRGs that are dominated by the AGN. If we estimate this at 24 microns, it's only about 6% of local LIRGs whose 24 micron emission is dominated by the AGN. The large majority of our samples have a very small contribution from the AGN at 24 microns, so basically less than 10%. Now, how do we compare this method, the spectral decomposition, with other methods people use in the literature? Here I'm just using a diagram that was put forward by Henrik Spoon and collaborators a few years back, where they compare the equivalent width of the 6.2 micron pH feature and the apparent strength of the silicate feature. And basically they did this is hard to see here, but they did this for a large sample of galaxies. And just by using these two features, they could basically classify galaxies as AGN or pure starburst. So basically a starburst will have a very large equivalent width of the pH feature, whereas an AGN will have a very small equivalent width. And here in between are the composite objects. And then these are LIRGs in the local universe, are in this diagonal here. And then we can do the same for our sample of LIRGs. And probably you can't see it here, I can't see it either, but the symbols here are color-coded in terms of the AGN contribution at 24 microns. So basically, blue dots here means very little contribution or none at 24 microns, and red and orange means between 20 and 50%. And as you can see, our method compares quite well with this more simple diagram, especially for those galaxies that are dominated by the AGN. Of course, the problem is when you have very small AGN contributions, and then these kind of diagrams are not very sensitive to the AGN contribution. And basically, galaxies with less than 10% AGN contribution kind of fall over here, but it's hard to tell. Another diagram that has been used a lot in the literature involves, again, using the equivalent width of the 6.2 micron pH feature versus a ratio between two fine structure lines in the mid-infrared, oxygen 4 and neon 2. The thing to keep in mind is the oxygen 4 can be produced by both AGN and star formation, but this ratio will be very high for galaxies that are dominated by AGN emission, and it will be very low for galaxies dominated by star formation. And basically, you can just plot this diagram on a very simple mixing curve, and this has been done in the past for ISO data and for Spitzer data. And now we can plot our sample of galaxies, and again, the dots are, the colors here indicate the AGN contribution. So again, we get a relatively good agreement for galaxies that are dominated by the AGN emission, so in orange and red. But again, when you go to small AGN contributions, small AGN fractions here in yellow and blue, our method is much more sensitive. Here, these kind of diagrams can't really tell you whether you have 0 or 10%. But for the galaxies dominated by the AGN emission, these kind of very simple diagrams work very well. Another important result is, as I said before, is that because of the torus model scale with the AGN luminosity, we can derive the AGN bolometric luminosities. So we find that, of course, the AGN that we detect in luminous infrared galaxies in the local universe are not very luminous. So the bolometric luminosities are in this range. And these numbers that we get from our modeling are in very good agreement with the estimates you get from X-ray observations. And I'll talk a little bit about this just in a few minutes. So it is nice to see that this method that is just based on spectral decomposition works so well. The other nice thing is that if you compare, there's a very nice relation between the AGN contribution at 24 microns here, so the y-axis, and the AGN bolometric contribution in the x-axis. So basically, these two quantities are related. So basically, if you can do by your own method some sort of spectral decomposition, and you can get an estimate of the AGN contribution at 24 microns, you immediately can compute this, you can translate this into the AGN bolometric contribution without having to use these models. And basically, you can use this kind of relation to get, if you know the infrared luminosity of your system, you can get the AGN bolometric luminosity of your galaxy. So this is a very nice relationship. So basically, just to sum up the results from the mid-infrared spectroscopy, we found that the combined mid-infrared plus optical detection rate of AGN is pretty high in local LIRGs. We find that about 70% of the IRAS systems contain an AGN. And you can see here, this is in the gray histograms here indicate the galaxies with an AGN detection. You can see that the detection rate is more or less constant with the infrared luminosity of the system in these 3 bins that we did for our sample. So basically, there is no dependence with the infrared luminosity of the system. That's not true for ULIRGs. When you go to higher infrared luminosities, then you do see a tendency with the AGN fraction and the infrared luminosity of the system. The other very important result is that AGN are only responsible for a very small fraction of the infrared luminosity of local LIRGs. On average, we find that they only contribute 5% of the infrared luminosity. And these are just our estimates of the errors. So basically what we are saying here is that even though you detect AGN in a lot of systems, as we said before, 70% of systems, bolometrically these AGN are not very important, and basically what is powering the infrared emission in this galaxy is star formation. So now just a couple of slides about the X-ray results. This is actually the work that was led by Miguel Pereira Santaella. You can start by just looking at the X-ray morphologies because it's also very informative. So this is just showing you a few examples in our sample. We found that basically the galaxies were in three groups. We found that actually the majority of the LIRGs, so in X-rays here is the soft band and the hard band. We found that the majority of local LIRGs saw relatively compact X-ray emission, but not point-like, but relatively compact, so between 1 and 2 kiloparsecs, and basically they were dominated by star formation. About 25% of local LIRGs have point-like morphologies, which are basically associated with the presence of an AGN, known AGNs from optical spectroscopy, so Cipher-1s and Cipher-2s. And then also about the other 20% of the sample showed very extended X-ray emission. And this is just one example here, and you can see how in the soft X-rays and also in hard X-rays, these galaxies were very, very extended. So basically it's telling us that what is powering the X-ray emission in this kind of galaxies is for sure star formation. You can actually look not only at the morphologies, but you can look at the spectra. This is just an example of one of the galaxies in our sample. This is actually a Cipher galaxy. So you can see here, this is an absorbed power law, very typical of highly absorbed AGN. And also another important feature here is this iron K alpha line at 6.4 keV. And this is typical of AGN, it's detected in a lot of local AGNs. So this line is very important because it can give us information about the luminosity of the AGN. Also, if the equivalent width of this line is very high, it's also an indication that the AGN is very, is very obscured, is very absorbed, or even it could be Compton thick. And the results from just doing the detail, I'm not going to go into the details, but just doing the detailed modeling of the X-ray spectra, is that the majority of the LIRGs, as I said before, were perfectly fine, perfectly fitted with just star formation. So basically, X-ray emission produced by thermal plasma and high mass X-ray binaries. And then those galaxies that were already classified as Ciphers, of course, they need this extra power law, especially to explain the hard X-rays. We only detected this iron K alpha line in a small fraction of our sample, and only in those galaxies that were classified as Ciphers. But we also find interestingly that about 40% of the galaxies in our sample, even though we couldn't measure the equivalent width of this line, we could actually just set an upper limit. We could, that this value of the equivalent width would be compatible with the presence of the Compton thick AGN. And again, this is in relatively good agreement with the results we said before with the mid-infrared spectroscopy, because these AGN that are present in a large fraction of local LIRGs are not very bright, so they could be either Compton thick or low luminosity AGN. And in fact, just by using these numbers and some empirical relationships, in the cases where we don't see this, we don't detect the line, we can actually put set an upper limit to the AGN bolometric luminosity, which is also compatible with the numbers we were getting from the spectral decomposition. Another way to do this is actually, we can actually predict the luminosity of the iron K alpha line that is produced by star formation. Even though, as I said before, this line is mostly produced in AGN, it can also be produced by star formation, very strong star formation. So actually, you can use some empirical relationship from your infrared data. You can actually you can derive the star formation rate of these galaxies, and then you can convert that into a iron K alpha line luminosity. And then you can just compare what you expect for star formation. So basically, this is the ratio between what you measure and what you would expect for star formation. And as you can see here, the green dots and the triangles are Cipher galaxies. This is what you would expect for Cipher galaxies. That, of course, the luminosity of this line is much higher than what you would expect from star formation alone. But also you find that a lot of galaxies could, we only have the upper limits, but could still be compatible with having AGN emission, as we know. And also some galaxies here that were initially classified as from optical spectroscopy as just powered by its star formation that are clearly AGN. So these kind of diagrams also give you an idea of the not only the whether you're dominated or not by the AGN, but also it allows you to identify new AGN, although we only found one of these cases in our sample. So basically for the full sample, using this kind of diagrams, we can actually estimate the bolometric luminosities. And again, they are in the range between 10 to the 42 and 10 to the 44. And if you ratio this number to the infrared luminosity of the system, you find that the AGN contributes between 1 and 35%, and on average is only 7 and 10%. And again, this is in very good agreement with what we were estimated from the mid-infrared. So basically what I showed is that you can use 2 independent methods to estimate the AGN contribution, and they give you comparable results. So just finally, we can actually now compare our sample of local LIRGs here, so the infrared luminosity is between 10 to the 11 and 10 to the 12, with the work done by Nardini and collaborators for ULIRGs. So here showing in these other 4 histograms here. So basically what we are showing here is the fraction of the population and is color-coded in terms of the AGN bolometric contribution. So in whites would be a very small AGN contribution to the total infrared luminosity, and then in pink would be a significant contribution from the AGN to the total infrared luminosity. And as you can see, there is a very clear dependence of the AGN bolometric contribution with the infrared luminosity of the system. And as you can see at the high end of the infrared luminosity of ULIRGs, with luminosities above 10 to the 12.7, you can see that most ULIRGs have a very important AGN contribution. But as we said before, this is not the case for local LIRGs. Even though the fraction of LIRGs containing AGN is very high. So just to finish, I'm just going to show my conclusions. Just to tell you that mid-infrared spectral decomposition is a very powerful tool to estimate the AGN contribution. Not only in the mid-infrared, but also you can estimate the AGN bolometric contribution to the infrared luminosity of the system. And this actually, I haven't shown any examples, but this kind of method can be used not only locally, but at high redshift, and it's very powerful also at high redshift. We found that using this spectral decomposition, we identified about 50% of local LIRGs have AGN. But if you combine all the different indicators of mid-infrared, X-ray, and optical observations, you find that about 70% of all LIRGs have an AGN. With the spectral decomposition alone, we are able to identify all the Spitzer-like AGN, which is good. And also we can identify more subtle AGN features, especially when you have a low luminosity AGN or composite objects. The AGNs in local LIRGs are always accompanied by a very strong star formation activity. And actually, as we said before, in most cases in local LIRGs, what is dominating the heating of the dust is the star formation and not the AGN. And AGN are only responsible for about 5% of the infrared luminosity of local LIRGs. And our results are in good agreement with estimates done by other groups and using other techniques. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Almudena, for this interesting talk. Anyone in the audience have questions?
Well, Almudena, let me go to the very beginning when you somehow explained the importance of studying this sort of objects. So you have this model in which the major process ends in the formation of an elliptical, and there I suppose that the key number is the relative fraction of the star formation and AGN, and this is a sort of timing of the process to get to the elliptical phase. Am I right?
Yeah. I think these models are not very good at telling you. I don't know if you're referring to that, whether star formation is first and then the AGN is later. I don't think they have the time resolution. But I mean, as you can see here, they seem to be almost in this, at least in this method, in these models, they are coeval. Because here you can see this is the quasar luminosity, and this is star formation rate. So when you get a peak of AGN activity, you also get a peak of star formation activity, and then here's just the final when they are just merging together. So in these models, they seem to go together. I'm not sure that was the question. But
yes, it could be also part of the question, but my question is even more simple. So if to get to this final elliptical, is it necessary to go to an AGN phase?
Well, I mean, you have to make the black hole grow. The only way to make the black hole grow is to accrete material. When you're accreting material at a high rate, you have an AGN.
So you are assuming that you end with an elliptical with a black hole?
Yeah. These models, what they are trying to produce is a depth elliptical plus a very massive supermassive.
Okay, so in the sample that you have some in which you find no clear activity, start from AGN activity. So this is
well, I think pure. The AGN can be. I mean, we haven't actually measured black hole masses in these galaxies, but for sure these galaxies that are just relatively early, not very early type, but they are not late type. For sure, they have a black hole. So obviously, they went through an AGN phase. And I think what you have to think about AGN is a phase, something they switch on or switch off.
Okay.
So when you're accreting a lot of material, then you turn on the AGN, basically.
So you find a large fraction of local luminous infrared galaxies that do contain AGNs. What's the fraction of AGNs that do not have high luminosities in the infrared?
Oh, very high, very, very high. So I think
locally.
I couldn't tell you, but well, let's see. I don't know the number, but I'm sure all the optically selected AGN are not infrared bright. So, but this is again, it could be, you can understand it as a phase. I mean, maybe for local Seyfarts, this is not the right model. It's more a secular evolution. But basically, an infrared phase would be when you're basically you have a lot of material that has been transported to the central region of the galaxies. You have gas and dust is obscuring the galaxy, and at some point you blow out this material. Feedback, AGN feedback, stellar feedback, and you end up with something that is optically bright. That's something you would identify as an optically bright AGN, not necessarily a infrared bright AGN.
And the second part of the question is, what is the fraction of luminous infrared galaxies local that do not have AGN?
Well, what we are getting is 30%.
Only 30%.
What is the question? That don't have, or they have but they don't dominate? I think they do have, most of them they do have AGN.
Well, AGN is, you see an AGN if you're accreting at a high rate.
Yeah.
They do have a black hole, but if the black hole is not accreting at a high rate, then you don't see it as an AGN.
Yeah.
I was curious to see that there seems to be a difference in the ratio of Seyfert 1s to Seyfert 2s as a function of luminosity. Mm-hmm. Is this not indirect evidence against a unified model?
What I can say in my defense is that, or in the unified model defense, is these are very dusty objects. So even the classification between type 1 and type 2 is not so simple. And also, I wouldn't select a sample of AGN based on infrared in this kind of, using this sample, because you're not sure you're being complete or you're missing a lot of the AGNs that are not optically identified as AGN. We don't know if they're type 1 or type 2. So
you can always save it by having the dust in the right place. Or the wrong place.
Yeah.
Any other question from Almudena? Well, I have the last one. You know that I'm interested in galaxy interaction. Have you looked, or someone has looked, if the galaxy, the LIRGs, for which you detect an AGN, the LAGN, are more interactions in this galaxy? I mean, if there are interacting systems, and the ones without the AGN don't have such a high...
Okay, we haven't actually looked at that, but that's something we are planning to do because we have this quite deep IRAC images. So first thing, we can just actually look for companions. And as I said before, it's interesting that a lot of these local LIRGs appear to be in groups. I mean, just by looking at the images, they seem to be in a relatively busy environment where you see a lot of little galaxies around, maybe minor mergers. But actually, to do this properly, you actually have to do spectroscopy and something we want to do with maybe with the GTC, because we do I mean, you look at things like this. I mean, there are things that are very, very clearly in groups. So the interactions are not very strong, but maybe they're just minor interactions. And so, I mean, something is bringing the gas into the centers of these galaxies to produce very high star formation rates. We don't know if it's secular or if it's just minor mergers, but what is clear is that for most LIRGs, it's not major mergers. So yeah, it's something we would do in the future. But the problem is the time scales of the AGN, right? That, as we said before, maybe there was an AGN, but if you don't see it at the right time, then yes or no.
Yeah, of course, but it would be interesting to check if there is an enhancement of the interactions in the AGN part of the LIRG. Okay, let's thank Almudena again.